there's an enormous amount of compliance. And the reason that compliance is there is because, like, if you're a small company, you know, a bigger company might say, hey, we require certain certifications, you know, in order to buy you. What the government does is they don't just say, hey, these are our requirements. They say, yeah, we baked our sales requirements into US code of regulation. Like, and so all of a sudden, like, they have to, like, comply with these regulatory things. And meanwhile, the US government has no tech regulator. Like, the FCC does, like, telecom stuff, right? Like Comcast, Verizon, whatever. So what they do is they say, why don't we use the power of the purse to regulate cybersecurity minimums by requiring them for the federal spend? And then it'll have this awesome ecosystem effect because everyone's going to want our TAM. So they're going to you know, bake in all this security, and then everyone's going to benefit because we're doing it. And in reality, what happens is a lot of companies kind of hive off their government instance because it has all of these, like, you know, requirements that aren't always in line with how modern technology is built. And then they go to town over here with, like, their commercial offering. So it's this hyper complex space where there's slow time to value, lots of regulations. And so I kind of exist to kind of help companies think through this and plan that out.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I am Kenny Scott. You are listening to the Paramify podcast, or you might even be watching it, possibly. Today, we're thrilled to chat with Mike Clauser. He's an absolute stud in the government affairs and cybersecurity and national security arenas. And Mike's impressive journey includes key roles at Okta, Access Partnership, Analog Devices, and Fujitsu Limited. He's had a stint as a national security aide at the Pentagon. He's got over a decade of service as a U.S. Navy intelligence officer, and he's also championed veterans' causes in public policy. Mike, you got degrees from just so many. Like, so you got Penn State, U.S. Naval War College, Poznan University of Economics, and the University of Exeter. What? How do I say? Is that it? Oh my God!
Rich would say Exeter, but we would say Exeter. Yeah,
I try not to do accents because it sounds so pretentious when I do it. And here, man, Mike, this is awesome. So Mike's a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the dedicated community volunteer. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on in your world, and we're going to talk about that in today's show. I can't wait to dive into that. I met you through a mutual friend at one of your past roles, and he spoke the world of you, and I'm super excited to be connected with Mike. Mike, tell us a little bit about how you started your career. How did that kick off? What path led you to where you are today? And then we'll just go from there.
Yeah, well, appreciate the question, but congratulations on all your success with Paramify. I mean, it's like, well, seriously, it's not every day you get to get interviewed by, like, you know, a startup founder CEO who's going to be the next Elon Musk. So
maybe not that, but thanks so much, man. But it's wild. It's been super fun, and I'm excited for what we're doing. But yeah, I appreciate you, man. That's nice.
For sure. No, so I guess, I don't know, like, I'll give you hopefully the speed nickel tour. You tell me if I'm slogging along too much.
No, but let's go.
I think while other kids, you know, were playing sports when they were young, I was doing Boy Scouts. And so I got really into civics, you know, I'd be the nerd who would watch C-SPAN over summer vacation. Like, I was that guy. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I just always like kind of like the bigger questions in life. I ended up going to Penn State for college. It was the second in my family to go to college, later first go to grad school, and ended up majoring in philosophy and religion and a minor in classics. And I was a freshman on 9/11. Thought about, you know, just dropping out and enlisting, but knew I wanted to work in national security after that. So I finished college in 3 years. And then in England, their master's degrees are just a year long. So I spent what would have been my senior year at the University of Exeter, where I picked up an international affairs degree. They had some joint program that Europeans call Erasmus, and that's why I went to this school in Poland, picked up an economics degree. But yeah, after that, wrote a thesis and showed up in DC 2005, kind of like two suitcases and a dream. Super arrogant, thought I'd be like Secretary of State in 5 years, but got, sort of was pounding the pavement, interning for free, trying to like get a start. And yeah, it was tough. Yeah, it's tough, like kind of to be this kid from the sticks and then move to the big city, especially, in a very curated place like Washington. And eventually got a job as kind of like a junior guy at like a consultancy, and paid dues there for 2 years before someone was kind enough to share my resume with the Pentagon. So it was the end of the Bush administration. I interviewed with the White House liaison office. That's how you get like these political jobs. And I came in as a very junior, politically appointed kind of assistant doing research in the legislative affairs shop at the Pentagon. Was there for a year, and then my last tour was on SecNav staff. And then the administration was over, and I carried in a little bit into the Obama administration during the transition period. But shortly after, I hopped and started working for a member of Congress that represented West Texas, like Panhandle, Amarillo area. He was on the Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. I was his national security aide. And got to do, that was a fun job, right? Getting to be like congressional staff and go on delegations up to Alaska and down to SOCOM and discuss nuclear weapons policy 1 second, and then it was just a fun job. But I had mentors in my life who were kind of like, Mike, you're a young guy, you're an able-bodied dude. We're a nation at war. Like, why aren't you doing more? And so I had started applying to this reserve program to be an intelligence officer in the Navy Reserve. And I actually got rejected like 3 times. I got rejected when I was working for the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Legislative Affairs. I got rejected when I was working for the Secretary of the Navy. And I applied the 3rd time, and I finally got in. It was kind of like the movie Kung Fu, where they make you stand outside the Shaolin Temple for 3 days without food, water, encouragement to make sure that you really want it. But I ended up joining the Navy out of the congressman's office, went to Intel school, became a division officer. And that was all like around the time that Snowden happened. And so like the first half of my career, Pentagon, Congress, Armed Services, joined the Navy. Also my first reserve weekend, they killed bin Laden. And then Snowden happened, and I kind of just watched like the camera move from like counterterrorism as like a priority in DC to tech after Snowden, after bin Laden. And so in a reserve capacity, I spent the next 6 years training to be a targeting officer in the Navy. But in my day job, I went to go work for this Japanese inbound company, kind of like the IBM of Japan, called Fujitsu. And for 5 years, I was their lead American in global government affairs. I was in their DC office. And this was like while GDPR was being debated and kind of still like not a thing yet, but very close. This is early days of people talking about AI regulations. And from there, I was given an opportunity to be head of global government affairs for a semiconductor company based in the Boston area called Analog Devices. Was there a year before a new GC came, swapped out the legal department. And so I went to Access Partnership. Really cool tour, consultancy, UK based, but what they do is when you think of lobbying, you think of like glad handing congressmen and things like that in DC. They did government abroad. So they'd be the company that American tech companies would hire to help them engage in Brussels, Southeast Asia, Middle East, Latin America. I was a P&L owner there for 2 years until Okta approached me and poached me to be their head of US Fed, and did that up until February. And then in February, they announced a raft of layoffs, and it was really tough on like the legal department and gov affairs. The whole team was kind of, and I ended up having to make a decision about what I wanted to do next. And I had been admiring guys like you, frankly, kind of guys who took the plunge. No, I mean it, like guys and gals, right? Who just were like, I see something. It doesn't exist yet, but I think it could be, like, let's build it. And I got a D- in college algebra, so I'm not like a technical founder or someone, but I felt that there was an opportunity in the government affairs space. And so decided to hang a shingle and found a company called Ark Strategy. And what Ark Strategy does is it provides what I call fractional head of gov affairs as a service to emerging and growth companies in tech, where government's either their customer, their regulator, or their competitor. So I think about, like, in a defense context, right? Like, government's going to buy your solid rocket motor or your drone, right? So that's government's buyer. But if you're an AI company, if you're a cyber company, government might be buying OpenAI, but it's more likely they'll be regulating OpenAI. And so how do you work with government as regulator? And then sometimes government says, we're just going to build our own. And it kind of crowds out private sector opportunities. And so how do you work with government when they're your competitor? And my thinking was that what these companies, they don't need like super expensive K Street, someone who just kind of can get you meetings, charge an arm and a leg, or like these graybeard ex-govies who, like, you pay a retainer just for the mere privilege of sort of being their client. They kind of needed someone in-house that can get familiar with their product, their strategy, build the gov affairs strategy, and execute it with them shoulder to shoulder. So that's what I'm trying to do with Ark Strategy.
Yeah, this is super interesting. And I guess you never think about, I guess, like, when we're approaching government and, like, agencies approach us about, hey, how could we, there are so many challenges, right? For people that, don't come from government. I come from cyber, like you. I got started as a consultant right out of the gate. It's kind of one of those best experiences to never have again, right? That's how I describe it, right? But man, your background is just so cool. I was also a boy. My mom made me Eagle Scout all by herself, right? So I was a scout too. It's pretty. But yeah, that's awesome. I love your background and just your thirst and hunger for knowledge, and honestly, like, love of country is really, really awesome. I think that's a lot to be admired. So let's jump into this. Okay, so if you are you have a client, right, and they want to have a government as a customer, let's kind of map it out. That journey, big challenges. What are the big opportunities? We can get into cyber and data privacy, obviously, but like, I want to hear from you.
Well, I'll just tell you from my perspective. Yeah, I'll give you my perspective on this, which is there's a lot of, like, founders. Let's think early tech company, right? And a lot of them, they see, like, hey, there's the TAM for civilian IT outlay is going to be $75 billion. And so they turn to their investors, right? They turn to their VCs and they go, TAM, 75 billion, and we're here, like, the journey's huge, like, the upsides, But, and so maybe they get some money, they get going, you start coding, they have a product. And then let's kind of talk about it in terms of, like, sales and engineering, right? So then sometimes they'll throw a sales guy in DC, and sales guy or gal, and they'll say, all right, go close that 75 billion, bring it home. But the truth is that, like, right now, so, like, we are talking, it is June of 2024, right? So, like, the government's fiscal year ends in September. So we're in the last bit of, like, fiscal year 24. As we're speaking, the House of Representatives is voting on fiscal year 25 appropriations, like, this week. And the Senate's going to follow shortly after. They'll conference together, come up with a final bill the president signs end of the year, right? Everything goes according to plan, and there's no brinksmanship, continuing resolution like that we've seen recently. Meanwhile, the executive branch, the folks that actually buy tech, like from vendors, they're debating FY26 right now. right? They're coming up with their agency priorities for fiscal year 26. Later this summer, August, maybe they're going to throw it to OMB to approve. OMB will do a pass back around Thanksgiving and say, hey, here's what we actually are going to, put forward in the president's budget. And then in February, when the president does his State of the Union, he's going to say, my fellow Americans, State of the Union strong, and then he's going to send his president's budget request. So you got to understand, if you're a founder, if you're in a tech company, fiscal year 24 is done. Fiscal year 25 at this point is the books are closed. Agencies now are looking at fiscal year 26. So from my point of view, it's like, why send a sales AE to DC to like try to make it rain when things are locked 2 years out, right? Like, why not? You got to move kind of north to in the budget process to make sure that there is budget for you in 26, right? Out years. Meanwhile, that's the sales side, right? Meanwhile, on the product side, they go, hey, we got these awesome features, functionalities. We've been hearing from customers, blah, 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 blah. Great. Well, they show up to DC and DC goes, I'm going to need you to confirm that you are compliant with NIST's Secure Software Development Framework. And you have to have your CEO sign here, stating under penalty of U.S. Criminal Code 18 U.S. Code that's completely accurate and true, and that there's no problems and flaws. To fix that costs burden. That's not our problem, right? That's called secure by design. Just do that. Oh, you're cloud and you want to handle federal data? I'm going to need you to do this FedRAMP thing. Unless you're doing DoD, then you got to do this risk management framework and these sort of impact levels 3, 4, 5, 6. There's an enormous amount of compliance, and the reason that compliance is there is because, like, if you're a small company, a bigger company might say, hey, we require certain certifications, in order to buy you. What the government does is they don't just say, hey, these are our requirements. They say, yeah, we baked our sales requirements into US code of regulation. And so all of a sudden, they have to comply with these regulatory things. And meanwhile, the US government has no tech regulator. Like the FCC does telecom stuff, right? Like Comcast, Verizon, whatever. So what they do is they say, why don't we use the power of the purse to regulate cybersecurity minimums by requiring them for the federal spend? And then it'll have this awesome ecosystem effect because everyone's going to want our TAM. So they're going to bake in all this security, and then everyone's going to benefit because we're doing it. And in reality, what happens is a lot of companies kind of hive off their government instance because it has all of these requirements that aren't always in line with how modern technology is built. And then they go to town over here with their commercial offering. So it's a hyper complex space where there's slow time to value, lots of regulations. And so I kind of exist to kind of help companies think through this and plan that out.
Yeah, man. The way you map that out makes just so much sense to me. And on the sales side in particular, that's where, we're super new, right? So, I think we're going to be talking a long time, you and I, right? But tell me a little bit more about that sales side, this process where someone says, yeah, we're just going to get someone out to DC and start selling into government. And a lot of times a salesperson, convinces you, the founder, that yeah, I can do it. They go in and because they're sales, right? They sell you first, right?
Yeah.
For founders, what are they when a founder is choosing someone for public sector? What are the things that they need to be looking for? What are some of the things that you absolutely have to have? What are some of the common red flags, that you would, advise a founder on? Red flags, opportunities, what are the things that they must have? This is really top of mind for me right now, so it's very selfish, my question.
Right. No, for sure. Here's the thing. Let's just pretend it's us girls talking here, right? So
yeah.
Sometimes it might be the case that occasionally founder CEOs want to hear some things that aren't necessarily reality. and
Yeah.
and so like it could be the case that like if someone wants the sales job, they'll say, I'm going to attack that $75 billion civilian TAM, right? Or I'm going to go DoD, spend all this money, we're going to go do that. And that gets a founder really excited, right? But if the person that you hire to, it depends. Like if you're looking to someone to hire a function who's going to have an account executive for Army, for DOJ, for whatever, and customer success, and like a larger firm, like, you know, like my prior employer, Okta, you really need someone who's going to say, like, listen, Kenny, like, we're going to have to spend a couple million to get FedRAMP moderate. And then depending on what kind of data you want to touch, it might be FedRAMP high. And that's going to take 18 months, and it's going to take a couple million and before we even see revenue, just to get in the door. And if you want to do DoD, that's going to be similar, right? With similar lag time, and, you know,
Yeah.
and I'm going to need a team that does customer success, but also engagement, like that. That's someone who's being honest with you about, you know, about like it's going to be, you know, a minute before you get the full value. If you get someone who's just like, hey, I'm hungry, I'm young, I'm just going to, like, you know, I'm going to throw myself against the wall until I get something. That's great. Like, but then, you know, probably what that person's doing is like in a defense context, maybe they're going after a cyber or something small, $1 million, $2 million, that's kind of gettable in like something that smells quarterly, right? But if you really want something that sticks, like, hey, we're going for a program of record, you know, at DOJ, at DoD, whatever, we're talking about a 3 to 5 year playbook. So you want someone who's going to be honest with you about, and they can back on it. Like, what, Kenny, listen, if you spend, you know, X amount of money on the compliance, on the team, right, like the revenue will be this, and then the next year it'll double. If they can map that out for you and have an adult conversation, because all of the beauty of doing business with the U.S. federal government is that it's steady money, it's predictable money, it's long-term money, it's sticky after you get over the initial hoops, right? That's, you know.
Yeah. The other thing for the founder is like, well, you're really hoping that you're delivering something that's going to make, you know, our country better, that's going to make us safer, that's going to help us be more efficient. I know that it's really hard to move a behemoth like, you know, the federal government, but hopefully you're part of the solution. And so from a founder's perspective, like me, I'm like, how do I get this into the hands of you know, of our country, right? That I love, right? That I want to be a part of the solution. So that's like where the founder's motivation is. And of course, right, we all want to, you know, we all want to do really well and we want to win, you know, everybody does, right? But just that perspective is really, really, really great. You know, just
but like also, I'm doing this mentally, so maybe I should just sort of say what's in my head.
Yeah, I love it. That's what this is about.
I'm kind of bouncing in my head between like defense scenarios and then, like, say, let's call it civilian tech. So like in defense, like there is kind of just one buyer, right? It's the DoD. It might be Marines, Army, whatever, but like it, and so that's your customer. And so when they say jump, you say how high, and you just do what needs to happen because that's your buyer. It's different when it comes to tech, right? Whether it's digital identity, endpoint detection, like, you know, any kind of like sort of, you know, cyber. What the U.S. government actually wants is they don't want you to come to them first. They want you to go out and sell in the commercial market and trial and error, get the bugs out and get the feature functionalities. And then they want you to come into the U.S. government and say, you know, now that you've iterated and you have a better product based on, you know, what's out there, bring us those insights by selling to the government. So that's that's a very different thing, right? It's very different than saying, whatever you want, government buyer, like, I'll do for you, versus, hey, here is this commercial off the shelf we can adapt for government. And then that's kind of where rubber meets the road. Because you look at like defense travel system. Maybe, I don't know if you've been following this, right? So defense travel system is this 25-year-old program that allows members of the military to book like travel using, you know, American Airlines, United, whatever. And it conforms to all the different DoD travel policies. And like everyone's like, why don't you just use Concur, SAP Concur, right? Or TripAdvisor or Expedia or whatever. Um, and so the government does want to bring in that best of private sector, right? But then what happens is they also say, you know, hey, we have our own list of DoD travel regulations that we need SAP Concur to also do. And then that starts driving up cost, right?
Yeah.
And like, so something's got to give. Either, either like the defense tech or the travel tech iterates for what the government customer wants, or the government has to say, maybe I can trim some of these regulations. Like that's the dance when you want to come to the government. And I saw this at some of the Silicon Valley kind of companies I've worked at.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that and your successes there. So we talked about, the product side and the challenges there. And so a great, your partners in business, they need to be well-versed on what it takes, to meet what the government wants. And so there's a lot of compliance that's required, right? So now you're looking at the government as a regulator. So most of us that have experience in a cost center, being in information security, we always know that, sales is pushing us to do things that make us uncomfortable. Sales is pushing us to do things that, can't be done, right? That's the perception, even though, we think in our cost center, right? It's different. Now that I've been a founder a couple times, I look at things a lot different than I used to, right? I have a new vision and a new appreciation for what business development does. It's so critical. I mean, that is our business. So, yeah. And you have a lot of friends, within those cost centers, and you've had a lot of success with those. So tell me a little bit about your approach when you're partnering with internal teams to help them get ready. So what are some things that you would advise people to think about, sales leaders in particular, when they're engaging legal, when they're engaging security, product, things like that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So you're asking not about necessarily talking, how do you advise sales externally about how they talk to government, but now it's how do you work internally?
And you're internally, you're a salesperson. How do you partner with your internal teams so that they actually want to help you, right? So what, maybe you have some stories or some scenarios, because I know you've had a lot of success there, and I know that, that's a difficult challenge for a lot of sales folks to do.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it takes time. Sometimes I bristled at it, but like the weekly or bi-weekly check-in call, like just to build relationship, and like I think that's important. Like I would do that because in Gov Affairs. So the curse of Gov Affairs is that you always work for non-Gov Affairs, right? Either usually you roll up to the general counsel who came up through being a lawyer and not a lobbyist, or you work for PubSec sales who doesn't engage Congress, they engage the end user. So, but the curse of Gov Affairs is you never work for other Gov Affairs. So no one ever really gets you or understands you.
Is that always the case? Is that
I think there's actually one exception that's like famous. So, I mean, so I'll put it this way. In the Navy, you would have two kinds of tours of duty.
Okay.
So one would be called a one-of-one. So that would be Mike as an intel officer at like an F-18 squadron, where I'd be the intel officer to the squadron. Everyone else is a pilot, except for me, the intel officer. I'm a one-of-one. The other is a competitive tour where I'm like with others like me, like at an intel cell at like, UCOM. And so that's what in a multi-client consulting, like a lobbying firm, like then there's others and everyone kind of gets you and understands you. But if you're at a company, if you're in-house, that's that one-of-one disassociated tour. The big exception, and I think it's a big exception, Brad Smith at Microsoft. That homeboy paid dues in the DC office of Microsoft in the 90s during like the antitrust trials. He he gets Gov Affairs, and there's a reason why Microsoft spends $1 billion with a B on global public affairs, because he saw the value of it when they were having these existential issues in the 90s. So aside from that, everyone else, worked there, was an associate or partner at a law firm, popped over to a company, and then they hire a Gov Affairs person. They don't really know. But anyway, to your question about working with sales, working with internal, so building trust, building personal relationships, making, you want to be helpful. And I think, legal sometimes just wants to say no, or at least that's the perception. And I think
let's speed things up. Let's get legal involved. Let's do it.
Yeah. Legal doesn't speed things up, but but legal should be a field enabler. Like if legal is doing their job well and right, they should be. What happens sometimes is there's not enough lawyers, and legal is considered a cost center, and so there's pressure to not create a little mini law firm. But the truth is that their ability to clear contracts, negotiate them, that enables the field. So it's just one of those guys spend money to make money. But I just think also communicating and making sure that folks kind of see what you're doing, the vision, and also kind of being humble to accept, give and take feedback. Because sometimes it's the case where sales goes, oh, I don't have time for that. I gotta hit this quarter. That was a big deal. And then legal can say, just so you know, before I came to this company a second ago, I was the general counsel in the Pentagon, and I think you're rushing this. Maybe you should maybe you should really dot those I's, cross those T's. Otherwise, we're going to have a bid protest afterwards. So I just think if you can communicate so that both sides understand the value add both are bringing, you build those relationships so that it's not, the incentives are aligned. I think that there's a lot to help move things forward.
Yeah, completely. Now, you mentioned this other phase, which I had not considered. When will the government be a competitor? And so I'm assuming that you would be looking to help them partner with them. How do we partner with the government if they do indeed have a competitive solution, or maybe not? I don't know. Tell me about that, because that I had never considered, and that's really interesting to me.
Well, I'll give you 2 examples. So one would be a defense example, right? And that's not maybe your world and your listeners' world, so I'll click on it. But, that's kind of where a drone company shows up to the Pentagon and goes, I built a drone. Would you like to buy my drone? It does all these things that you want, it to do. It can go kinetic. It can have ISR, it can do all these things, right? And the DoD goes, yeah, that's great, but we have a drone program where we have these government requirements, and we're going to pick some defense company to then build it for us over a 5 to 10 year period.
Got it.
And then the drone company goes, but I've already done that. I built it. It's here. Just buy it commercially. And they go, no. We've got this program. It has this acronym. It's called the XCOM program, or whatever it is. And so then it's how do you compete with the government who says, no, we have a program for this. You don't need a program. You just buy it commercially. That's a gov material example. But I'll give you an example that there's a lot of folks in the private sector watching, and that is at GSA. Congress asked GSA, required them to be self-sustaining financially. So in other words, they said, we don't want to have to appropriate for GSA anymore. You are the government's buyer, right? You're the procurer for government services. So I need you to take a vig off the top and pay for yourselves. And that's not a thing you turn on overnight. It takes time for GSA to, from appropriated funds to a cost recovery model. But one of the sort of, innovations, if you want to call it, was that GSA said, there's a lot of tech that a lot of agencies do, and they all do it they all need the same thing, and none of them are the expert on it, right? So we all know DOJ does law enforcement, DOD does fights wars, deters enemies. but like none of them like are like digital identity. So they said, why don't we create our own login? And so hence login.gov was born, right? And it was coded by federal employees with white badges to kind of create a simple logon system, right? Well, if you're ID.me, Okta, Auth0, there's a variety of companies, Socure, you're like, well, but we do login. And they're like, well, that's nice, but we've just coded our own thing now. And then, so to your point, most founders go, well, hey, can we partner? Can we do business? Maybe you can put us in the tech stack. But increasingly in these programs, the government says, nah, we'll just code it. And from the government's point of view, their idea is, well, listen, we're building in an open source, right? So it's free. It's free in the sense of like we're not paying for licenses. We can charge on a recoverable basis, like fee for service, and so we'll get back our development fees, and then we'll make revenue. So like we'll be able to do what Congress wants us to do, pay for ourselves. But the problem is then it kind of craters the market, because if you're these identity verification companies, you're like, but like if the whole federal government's just using you, well, then there's no market for us. So we're not going to invest in FedRAMP. We're not going to invest in product. And so sometimes that, yeah, it can be a problem and have sort of unintended consequences. So, identifying the drivers of that, like, what are the incentive structures, right? So, GSA has incentive structures, these companies. And so kind of bringing them together, talking through it, figuring that out, I think is an important piece, especially if it's a market closing for companies. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I appreciate that so much. Okay. All right. So you probably got some pretty cool stories with your time in the Pentagon and in the Navy, and obviously a ton of experience there. So I wanna just ask you. We ask this to everybody. The pearls of wisdom that you would share, with a younger Mike Clauser, or like your nephew, son, niece, nephew, whatever it is, right? What are some of the pearls of wisdom that you would share with them about how what they should be focused on getting in a career, especially in government?
Yeah, there's a few. I'll just maybe in no particular order. So one is, when I was at Penn State, Ben Stein, of like Win Ben Stein's Money, of like Bueller, Ben Stein, right? He came
awesome.
to speak, and he said, if you want to do something, you got to move to the city where they're doing it. So like he's like, if you want to work in finance, you're not going to do that in Boise, probably. You're going to do it in New York. If you want to work in acting, you're Los Angeles, maybe New York, right? In government, it's going to be DC. There's always exceptions to rules, but there are people that I grew up with, friends with, went to college with, and they expressed interest in national security or working in government. And I said, yeah, great, just move down here. And they're like, I can't move down there without a job. But I did, and I wasn't rich. Like I was on the fumes of student loans.
Right.
And I almost call it the like Darwin test. Like if there's almost an early hurdle and weeding out of like, can you just take the plunge and just show up somewhere and say, I'm here, put me in the game, coach. Because if you can't, you might kind of stay in your hometown and might just have a life that kind of like the movie Mr. Destiny, like that kind of just moves in that direction. If you don't like show up and make yourself visible and present where things are happening. Two is like, be humble. Mike Clauser in his 20s was not a humble bumble. And like, part of that I think, goes into like the same kind of person that shows up and is like, I'm Mike Clauser, I'm from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, I'm going to come and work in government, can do that. But at the same time, Humility is important. And I know I was not served well by lucking out and having an early opportunity in the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill. And things didn't get fixed until I joined the Navy. And I had a non-commissioned officer, Navy chief, who looked a ton like Dave Chappelle. And then he would show up and he would say, "Bleeping ensign, I gotta talk to you." And he would take me in a room. Come here, Ensign Clauser.
Yeah.
And he would chew me out.
Yeah.
And I needed a lot of chewing out. Like, I needed a ton of chewing out. And so that was a good thing for my soul and just for, kind of like who I am. So humility is a part of it. And then like hard work, like, I mean, you can say that, but like, there's a lot of people that talk a lot about self-care and work-life balance and things like that. And that's great. But like, it's the people who are kind of still at the office when you leave and then there when you show up that are going to kind of pop ahead. And, there's a point in life for work-life balance. Like, I've got 3 kids now. It's why I'm choosing self-employment. But in my 20s, there was no work-life balance, right? There was just like throwing myself against the wall, and always saying yes and not saying no, and no job too small. So those are kind of the things I think that were helpful and useful to me early on.
Yeah, your story about like, getting into the Navy as an officer, like intelligence officer, that's so cool. It kind of demonstrates the grit. I mean, that confidence, I think all of us have it, when we're a teenager, right? We know everything. And that confidence is important. And honestly, as a founder, also similar, right? The naivete is a superpower. But then experience just humbles you no matter what. And so that's, if you continue that hard work, that's why they say there's no substitute for experience. Going through that cycle of I can do this, right? I can have that faith to create something that doesn't exist, a solution that doesn't exist. This is where we're going, and this is what we're gonna do. And that whole process is, becomes a joy in and of itself, right? And yes, the things that matter most are the things that last the longest. But balance is not the way, should not be the focus. Your mental health will be great if you win, right? If you achieve, if you progress, and that costs a lot, right? And so if your mental health will be good if you work hard at building that relationship with, your spouse and your kids and your partners and whoever it is, but you just got to have grit. All of it takes work. So the confidence, humility, hard work, I love it, man.
Life is a balancing act, and there is work-life balance at some point. Like at some point, and also like you got to accept the chewing out, right? I mean, we used to say in the Navy, you can either make the Navy happy, your day job happy, or your family happy, but not all 3 at the same time. Only 2 of the 3. And so sometimes, like, you're gonna bounce checks with with my military service, my reserves. You got to just be willing to take that like not perfect fit rep.
Yep. You will pay the cost. You'll pay the cost of that because you're buying something more valuable, right? You got to pick.
Or you're gonna bounce check with maybe your wife, or your family, and then but like
don't do too much.
I think but like courage. I mean, I think courage is like understanding like I'm willing to take, like I'm not perfect, I'm not God, like I'm willing to take the chewing out because I can do what I can do. I can do more than what I can do.
Yeah, I love it, man. Mike, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been incredibly valuable for me personally. So selfishly, I love this one. So I really appreciate your time coming on the show. Tell us a little bit about how we can find out more about you and where we follow you.
Yeah, no, awesome. So I am hanging a website soon. Maybe it'll be out by the time this is posted at arkstrategy.co. That's .co. That M cost $4,000. So
Yeah.
to make it so it's arkstrategy.co, and then on Twitter or X at ark_strategy. Then there'll also be a LinkedIn page set up soon.
That's awesome. Well, really appreciate your time, Mike. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Hey man, appreciate you.
All right, brother.